That first ting of bolt cutters on steel didn't just echo through the Texas night, it sliced straight through my porch, my heartbeat, and every inch of the 100 acres I swore I'd protect. 3 silhouettes crouched at my gate thinking they were ghosts in the dark. They didn't know I was already awake, shotgun, loaded finger, steady, watching them choose felony over common sense. I waited. One more snap, one more breath, one more line crossed, and just as their truck revved to ram the gate, I saw something else in the tree line, a pair of headlights I recognized. She came to watch this happen, but not the way she expected. I didn't need the headlights to swing any closer to know whose SUV was hiding between the mesquite trees. There's only one person in this county who would watch a break-in like it was a board meeting she scheduled herself, Karen Delworth, president of High Oak View Estates. The kind of woman who treated control like oxygen and believed the world fell apart the second something existed outside her clipboard. My first run-in with her told me everything I needed to know. She didn't pull up my driveway like a neighbor, she advanced on it like a hostile takeover. Perfect white Lexus pastel suit, camera already in hand. She didn't ask questions. She issued statements. My barn was unsightly, my land non-compliant, and I was expected to join her HOA like a soldier falling into rank. But the part that stuck with me wasn't the arrogance. It was the quiet threat that followed when I told her no, the way her jaw tightened, the way she snapped photos of my gate, my face, my land. She wasn't documenting concerns. She was building a target folder. So when I saw her watching tonight, I realized the men at my gate weren't acting alone. And whatever she planned next, it wasn't going to stop with bolt cutters. I didn't move out to this stretch of Texas because it was quiet. I moved out here because the silence belonged to me. 100 acres of scrub mesquite and stubborn old fencing paid for in cash and free from anyone else's rules. After 20 years in the Army Corps of Engineers, I wanted a place where a man could mend a windmill, raise goats, and watch the sun drop behind the ridge without a single clipboard in sight. For a while, that's exactly what I had. My days fell into a rhythm I could trust. Sunrise, coffee, fence checks, repairs on the old barn roof that groaned like it had stories older than both of us. Nothing fancy, just honest work and wide land. Then the storm hit, not the rain, the sign it left behind. Along my south fence line, stamped deep in the clay, was a boot print that didn't belong. Not a rancher's tread, not a hunter's. Tactical soles, heavy lug pattern weight distribution, meant for people who breach doors for a living. And the worst part? The print faced inward toward my house. Whoever left it wasn't passing through, they were observing. That was the first ripple. The second came 2 days later in a cream-colored envelope, High Oak View Estates Homeowners Association, claiming my weathered barn roof disrupted their subdivision's visual harmony. Their subdivision, my land, not even on the same tax map. The first letter made me laugh. The next 4 didn't. The language shifted from requests to compliance expectations, like they'd already decided I was under their thumb. And then Karen arrived. Lexus shining, posture-stiff clipboard held like a weapon. She talked about community standards and mandatory membership as if she could simply annex my ranch by speaking it loud enough. When I declined, she didn't argue, she documented. My gate, my barn, my face, evidence for a plan she thought would go unnoticed. That's when things stopped feeling bureaucratic and started feeling tactical. Survey lasers drifting across my porch at night, a GPS tracker stuck to my truck axle, a black F-150. Creeping up my road-carrying men who talked like they were delivering warnings. Every sign pointed the same direction, someone was preparing for a nighttime entry. So when I heard bolt cutters bite my chain at 114 a.m., I didn't wonder why they were there. I wondered how far they were willing to go and whether she was watching from the dark like she'd planned all along. The first signs didn't look dangerous. That's what made them dangerous. Before the bolt cutters in the dark, before the tactical boots at my gate, the HOA came at me with quiet little jabs. Envelopes began appearing in my mailbox with the same sterile logo from High Oak View Estates. Visual nuisance, structural inconsistency, odor impact, all aimed at a ranch they had no authority over. At first, I shrugged them off. Paper doesn't rattle a man who's patched roofs in war zones. But the pattern tightened fast. Each new violation landed right after someone from the subdivision slowed their car near my fence line, the same slow roll I'd noticed before finding that tactical boot print after the storm. And the language kept changing. Requests became expectations. Expectations became non-compliance. Non-compliance became further actions may be taken. It felt less like an HOA and more like someone testing the perimeter of my patience, mapping my reactions, the way professionals map entry points. By the time the 5th letter arrived, I wasn't annoyed anymore. I was alert. Because pressure like this never ends on paper. It always escalates. The letters were irritation. The next phase felt deliberate. Cars from High Oak View began drifting slower and slower past my frontage, not out of curiosity, but calculation. Windows cracked just enough for a phone lens. Engines idling as if waiting for permission to trespass. You can feel when someone isn't just looking at your land, they're measuring it. And then Karen crossed the line herself. I found her pressed against my gate one afternoon, arm threaded through the bars, snapping pictures of my barn interior like she was conducting an official inspection. No greeting, no explanation, just that cold appraising stare over the rim of designer sunglasses. When I stepped toward her, she didn't flinch. She simply pivoted to a new angle, documenting what she wanted, as if my property had already been penciled into her jurisdiction. That night, long after the subdivision lights faded, a thin green laser swept across my front yard. Clean, steady, intentional, the kind used for surveying distance or marking a breach point. It traced the barn door, paused at my porch, then vanished into the mesquite. That was no neighborhood dispute anymore. That was someone studying my defenses. And once people start studying defenses, they're getting ready to test them. Boundary games turn into real danger fast, and mine did sooner than I expected. I was changing the oil on my truck when I spotted it, a black magnetized box tucked against the rear axle. Not a kid's prank. A commercial-grade GPS tracker, the same model I'd seen contractors use overseas. Someone wasn't just watching my land anymore. They were tracking me. That same week I found a section of my north fence wire cut clean through. Not chewed by wildlife, not worn by weather, sliced with precision. A single strand left hanging like a warning left on purpose. And the calls of coyotes out in the dark suddenly felt too close, too well-timed. Then came the black F-150. It rolled up to my gate like it had every right to be there. Two men stepped out, tactical pants, black polos, no logos. Calm, confident, trained. The kind of men who don't raise their voices because they assume you'll fold long before they need to. Join the HOA, this stays easy, one said. Keep resisting, accidents happen. It wasn't a threat, it was a business plan. That's when everything inside me clicked into the same place it had in war zones. This wasn't harassment anymore. This was preparation for a hostile entry. And hostile entries always come at night. The visit from the black F-150 didn't scare me, it clarified things. When men like that show up with threats polished into polite sentences, you know you're not dealing with amateurs. So I did what any man who's lived through real conflicts does. I prepared. First, I reviewed the law. Texas Penal Code isn't bedtime reading, but I wanted every line memorized, especially the parts about nighttime entry, forced access, and the homeowner's right to defend property. If they were going to push this into criminal territory, I needed the rules to be ironclad. Then I called the sheriff's office not to report anything, but to ask a few pointed hypothetical questions. The deputy on duty didn't say much, but the pauses between his words told me enough whatever was happening on my land wasn't normal for this county. Meanwhile, the HOA's tone escalated again. A new letter arrived with language so sharp, it might as well have been written by a lawyer. Your continued resistance will trigger corrective enforcement. Corrective enforcement from a subdivision half a mile away. By then I knew the next move wouldn't be words. It would be boots in the dark. And that meant it was time to fortify. Once the HOA started speaking in threats and the sheriff's pauses grew too long, I knew exactly where this road was headed. So I turned my ranch into something no hired thug wanted to test twice. I reinforced the gate hinges with welded steel, recalibrated the keypad encryption, and walked every fence line until I knew each weak point better than my own heartbeat. But the real upgrade was the lighting. 4 high-lumen LED flood units mounted across the barn roof, wired to a manual override only I controlled. One switch in my yard would flash from pitch black to interrogation room white in a millisecond. If they came, I wanted them stunned, blinded, confused, and on the wrong side of the law. And then just past one, it happened. My motion alert chimed soft as a whisper. Camera 2 lit up. 3 silhouettes by the gate, the same black F-150 idling behind them. One lookout, one with a flashlight, one raising a pair of industrial bolt cutters, like he'd done this exact job before. Ting, the first bite of steel. They weren't trespassing anymore, they were committing a felony on my property. But what froze me wasn't the men. It was the second vehicle parked deeper in the trees. The white SUV I knew all too well. She wasn't sending them, she was watching. The moment the bolt cutters snapped the second link, I hit the floodlight switch. The night exploded. 4 stadium-grade LEDs detonated across my yard, turning darkness into a blinding white blast that swallowed every shadow. The 3 men reeled back like they'd been hit with a flashbang. The lookout threw an arm over his face. The flashlight guy dropped his light altogether. The cutter froze, blinking hard, hands trembling around the tool. I stepped out from behind the shed, shotgun raised the pump already racked. "Stop right there," I barked, my voice sharp enough to slice through the glare. They didn't move, couldn't move. Between the lights, the camera staring straight at them, and the unmistakable sound of a 12-gauge pointed their way, they understood exactly how badly they'd miscalculated. "I call the sheriff for injuries I warn, not trespassing. So you boys decide how you want to leave." Panic cracked them open. The cutter dropped his tool like it burned. The lookout stumbled. All 3 bolted for the truck in pure chaos. But as the F-150 fishtailed away, my eyes locked on the tree line on the white SUV, still sitting there, engine off, watching. She didn't flee, she observed, and that made everything far worse. By sunrise, the adrenaline had faded, but the evidence hadn't. The bolt cutters lay twisted in the dirt. My chain was half severed, and every second of the break-in was locked into the hardwired cameras mounted on my barn, time-stamped, high-resolution, indisputable. Deputy Sloan Va Rollins arrived just after dawn, still sipping gas station coffee. When I replayed the footage on the barn monitor, Sloan let out a long, low whistle. "Cal, this wasn't kids messing around," he muttered. "No," I said. "Look at the stances. They're trained." We slowed the clip. The lookout scanned angles like he was on a paid job. The cutter worked fast and methodical, and behind them, just barely in the frame, the white SUV sat motionless among the mesquite. Rollins leaned forward. "Is that who I think it is?" "Oh yeah," I said. She watched the whole thing. Then the break. Neither of us expected the cutter. The one who twisted his ankle running from my floodlights checked into urgent care overnight. Deputies picked him up, ran his ID, and found active warrants. And the moment he realized he was headed back to county, he started talking. About who hired him, about the cash, about the instructions, and about the woman who promised everything would be quick and clean. He even handed over his phone. The text told the whole story in Karen's own words. They asked me to come down to the station that afternoon. When I walked into the lobby, I didn't need a name tag to know who was sitting there. Karen looked like she'd stepped out of a magazine, spread perfect hair, perfect posture, but her eyes were cracked glass. Beside her sat a lawyer in a charcoal suit who already looked like he regretted taking the case. We were all ushered into an interview room, me on one side, Karen and her attorney on the other, deputies Sloan and Rollins standing by the door. Her lawyer started smooth. "My client wishes to clarify a misunderstanding. The individuals last night were conducting a wildlife survey. With bolt cutters, I cut in." Sloan didn't wait. He dropped a folder onto the table. Inside were printed text messages, payment screenshots, and a statement signed by the cutter who'd been picked up at urgent care. Karen's complexion drained to chalk. "Miss Delworth Sloan said your contractor confessed. He says you paid him $3,000 cash to cut the gate, disable cameras, and apply pressure so the property owner would consider selling." Her lawyer whipped toward her. "You didn't tell me about messages." "They're lying," she snapped, voice breaking. "He's dangerous. He threatened them. He defended his property during a felony in progress," Sloan replied, "and you orchestrated it." The metallic click of the cuffs was soft, final, and strangely peaceful. Karen Delworth, HOA President, was officially under arrest. In the hours after Karen's arrest, the ranch finally felt still again. Not the tense watch-your-back stillness I'd lived with for weeks, but something quieter, almost clean. I slept with the shotgun still beside the bed that first night, not out of fear, but out of habit formed under pressure. By morning, the air felt different, the kind of different you only notice after a storm breaks and the land remembers how to breathe. What surprised me wasn't the sheriff's follow-up call or the paperwork that came next. It was the people. Folks from High Oak View, people I'd barely exchanged waves with, started reaching out. At first it was subtle, a nod from a jogger passing on the county road, a wave from a man walking his dog, a couple leaving a grocery bag of homemade bread at my gate. Then the stories came, about fines handed out during funerals, about a veteran harassed for his service dog, about families strong-armed into voluntary upgrades. Turns out I wasn't the only one she'd cornered. I was just the first one to corner her back. More cars slowed near my fence line now, but the cameras weren't needed. They weren't scouting anymore. They were saying thank you in the quiet way country people do. The legal wheels started turning faster than I expected. Once the deputies submitted the evidence, the footage, the bolt cutters, the contractor's statement, and especially the text messages, Karen's situation went from overstepping HOA president to defendant in a criminal conspiracy. But the real earthquake came when the district attorney opened the second folder, the forged land expansion documents. Pages meant to prove my property was part of an HOA annexation zone from the late 92nds. It would have been laughable if it weren't so calculated. My lawyer, Rebecca Green, didn't smile much. She didn't have to. She shredded the documentation piece by piece in court. A forensic analyst confirmed the fonts used on the 1997 directive weren't even created until 2005. Dates didn't match county records. Signatures were traced, and emails between Karen and a real estate developer surfaced showing promises of a land deal worth six figures contingent on acquiring my acreage. When the judge rendered the verdict, the courtroom didn't cheer. It just exhaled. Karen received 4 years probation, over $400, 0 inches fines, and a lifetime ban from serving on any HOA or community board. The developer withdrew from the county entirely. High Oak View's charter was suspended pending full restructuring, which, judging by the look on many faces in that courtroom, was long overdue. And my land declared 100% independent, untouchable, outside any HOA authority now and forever. A week after the verdict, I welded a new steel sign to my gate: private land. Trespass after dark equals bad decisions. Not hostile, just honest. Life settled back into the rhythm I'd fought to protect. The nights felt clean again. I slept deeper. The goats stopped pacing the fence line. Even the windmill creaked less, like the whole ranch was finally unclenching. One evening, as the sun dipped red behind the ridge, a truck eased up my drive. Not a black F-150. This one was older blue and driven by Mr. Ramirez from across the road. He stepped out holding a cooler. "We owe you," he said simply. Inside were tamales and a six-pack of Lone Star. Karen had everyone scared for years. "You just ended it." He wasn't the only one. Over the next few days, neighbors brought pie tools, even volunteer help to restring my north fence. Not because they wanted something, because they finally could. Without fines, without fear, without her. The newly reformed HOA, now voluntary, sent a handwritten note: "Thank you for protecting what we couldn't." And though I've never been a man who looks for compliments, that one sat with me. That night I leaned back in my porch chair. Stars bright above my 100 acres, the world finally quiet for the right reasons. No headlights lingering in the mesquite, no lasers across the yard, just peace earned the hard way. Funny thing about peace, it sounds sweeter when you've had to defend it.